I would like to draw your attention to the fact that today, on the 29th of April,
our foreign minister is going with an official visit to Astana. The main part of his visit will be on the 30th of April.
The head of the Russian Foreign Ministry will be received by the President of the Republic of Kazakhstan, and he will have negotiations with the Foreign Minister of this state. The main attention during the visit will be given to the issues of strengthening comprehensive strategic partnership, alliance, in the context of the upcoming contacts on the highest level. In this contexts,
смотреть двустороннюю повестку дня. Это и уплотнение связей в политической, торгово-экономической, культурно-гуманитарной сферах, а также взаимодействие на общих интеграционных площадках, прежде всего ЕАЭС, ОДКБ, ШОС, СНГ, безусловно. А также министры обменяются мнениями
They're going to speak about the whole range of bilateral relations, as well as the schedule of contacts at the highest high-end working level. The special attention will be given to the preparation of meetings of the Intergovernmental Russian-Indian Commission on Trade, Economic, Scientific, Technical, and Cultural Cooperation. And of course, they will consider the issue of the whole range of agenda of mutual interest, and they will speak about the contacts and the preparation to the contacts at the highest and higher level. Let's speak about the relevant international agenda. Ukrainian crisis. Kiev neo-Nazi regime cynically continues to perform massive terrorist attacks against civilians and civil infrastructure of Russia. During the last week, the shellings and drones of Ukraine Nazis affected around 200 of our citizens. 174 of them were injured. 9 of them were kids. 24 people killed, including 2 kids. I'm going to give some detailed facts about the region so that no one had an opportunity of those who are covering this topic abroad and are trying to get hold of the situation, so that they would not have a chance that they didn't know about this. Belgorod region, 25th, 28th of April. The strikes of Ukrainian drones killed 5 people, more than 10 affected, including 2 kids of 12 and 13 years old. Vologda region, the night of 26th of April, attack of Ukrainian drones against an enterprise to produce fertilizers. High-pressure pipeline with sulfuric acid was affected. 5 people received chemical wounds. DPR, 24th, 25th of April, an attack of the AFU against the civil infrastructure. A woman died, 13 people were injured, including 2 volunteers who were providing humanitarian aid. LPR, the night of 25th of April, drone attack in the village of Solonsy, 3 people killed. I need to underline all of these are civilians. 2 were injured. The same day, a drone injured 2 elderly women and a worker of road service in the city of Rubezhna. 26th of April, the result of a targeted attack of the AFU drones in the village of Bulgakovka. 2 people killed, 18-year-old boy and a girl of 28 years old. 15-year-old boy and a girl were affected, as well as the man of 21 years old. Can you just imagine? Who are they hunting? Who are these the Kiev regime is hunting? Sverdlovsk region, 25th of April, hostile drone attacked an apartment building in Yekaterinburg, 6 people affected. Sebastopol, a massive attack of Ukrainian drones in the night of 26th of April, 4 people affected, 1 killed. Debris affected the building of the city hospital, more than 50 buildings, including 34 apartment buildings. The drones were full of tungsten balls for maximum damage. And I would like to underline it, for maximum damage for civilians. There was an insignificant damage to the obelisk of the hero city of Sebastopol, known as Bayonet and Sail. The monument, this is the monument to the Second World War. It is not an accident that it is affected, given that it is the run-up to the Victory Day, and the Ukrainians are trying to overshadow the celebration in vain. They want to cancel all of this, to forget all of this. They demolish monuments, they exhumate graves using excavators, taking out the remains of the soldiers of the Second World War and the Great Patriotic War. They want to damage maximally their historical memory, to mock those who were saving the world from the scourge of fascism. That is why they choose the objectives not only in Ukraine, but everywhere they can do it. The Western Europe destroys monuments in its own way. Ukraine has found its own ways, and now they're trying to reach our territories. Kherson region, 25th, 26th of April, terrorist attack killed 2 civilians, 2 injured. Zaporizhia region, 28th of April, 4 drones attacked civilian structure. According to Maxim Petukhov, the mayor, there were attacks against the gas dissemination station. This is not an accident, because the energy terrorism is also one of the hallmarks of Kiev regime. They attack infrastructure related to energy. Krasnodar region, the night of 28th of April, there was an attack, drone attack, against an oil refinery in Tuapse. As the President of Russia said, the AFU attack against Tuapse can result in environmental consequences, which means that the Kiev regime absolutely ignores this fact, as well as the international organizations. There is no reaction. There are such organizations, but they do not react. The Black Sea, where Tuapse is located, is not only the Russian Sea. Let's remember, there are also other countries on the shores of the Black Sea. For instance, Turkey, Bulgaria. These are NATO countries, if I'm not mistaken. So these are countries that give money. I'm speaking about structures. Well, for instance, Bulgaria votes for this every time in the context of the EU, and Turkey and Bulgaria are NATO members. So obviously they have collective responsibility for the decision made by all the countries of this alliance to pump up Kiev with weapons. So with their political acts of support and financing, direct supply of weapons and information help, they contribute to the fact that the sea, which they have access to, is affected. I'm speaking about environmental damage to this sea. Does anyone in Turkey or Bulgaria think about this? Do they make questions? What are they financing, taking the money from their own citizens, financing the Kiev regime? It seems they do not think about this, but they should. All of this means that the Kiev regime is a terrorist regime. Full ignorance of all the criminal activities, massive activities, by all the international environmental human rights organizations and structures is what we see. But Russian law enforcement agencies continue to find the evidence to sentence the Ukrainian militants and foreign mercenaries. In February and May of 2022, 21 and 16 years of sentence were given to the criminals. For instance, one of them was Ivan Kimnatny. 13 years was the sentence for the mercenary from Poland, Krzysztof Laczek, who fought on the AFU side. Let's remember how it started. No, it wasn't in 2022, it was even earlier. We have spoken about Bucha. It started even earlier, all of these crimes based on propaganda. Remember how many times we spoke how Westerners turned a blind eye to obvious crimes of the Kiev regime. But I would like to underline once again that all of this is a very long story. It started long before the 2022. On the 2nd of May 2014, 12 years ago. Not 12 years ago, but 12 years as the West has been turning a blind eye to it. In the House of Trade Unions in Odessa, dozens of people were killed because they could not agree to the unlawful seizure of power in Ukraine because it was unconstitutional and anti-popular. It was a neo-Nazi regime using neo-Nazi slogans. The basis of the policy of those who committed this seizure of power was the ideology of exterminating everything that has to do with Russian. People were burned alive, more than 40 people. No, it wasn't during the Second World War or Great Patriotic War. It was 12 years ago, in the center of Europe. This is part of Europe. 40 people were burned alive. Those who were jumping out of the windows, trying to save themselves from the fire. The deranged Nazis were killing already on the ground. We remember with pain in the heart those tragic events, and we mourn the victims, the guilty in this massacre. I will tell those who don't know about this or have forgotten, have not yet been punished. How can this be? 40 people were burned alive and the rest were killed on the ground, but there are no one is responsible. And this happened in the center of Europe. The Kiev regime, despite new evidence of that horrifying crime, and there is conclusions of the ECHR about the lack of action by Ukraine, continues to cover its tracks and cover for the guilty ones. They do not consider them responsible. They consider them heroes. They consider that Bandera was a hero. That is why these people are also a hero. But such crimes have no statute of limitations, and all those who participated in this inhumane crime, that in fact was a massacre, will face justice. A year ago, on the 26th of April 2025, the Kursk region was liberated from Ukrainian terrorists and foreign mercenaries. This horrible violence against civilians that was committed by the Ukro-Nazis was even exceeded the ideal predecessors from the Nazi Germany. And they even tried to attack the Kursk NPP. They've been applauded and they've been accompanied by their NATO supervisors. They're using the topic of nuclear weapons and nuclear energy as blackmail. Many of the thugs were justly punished at the battlefield, and some of them were captured, and now they are already punished or waiting for their sentence. This is a logical conclusion for all who forget the lessons of the history.
We appreciate the efforts of all our military men and our brothers in arms from the DPRK who fought heroically against the enemy. In our memory will forever remain the names of those who gave their lives for the deliverance of the Kursk region from the neo-Nazi scum. I would like to speak about this in detail. You saw partially this on some mass media, but I would like to develop on this subject. In line with Article 4 of the Strategic Partnership and the DPRK during the Pyongyang summit in June 2024, the military men of the Korean army joined the aggression to repel aggression against the territory of the Kursk region on April 26, 2026, on the first anniversary of the liberation of the Kursk border area from gangs of Ukrainian Nazis and foreign mercenaries. A solemn ceremony of opening the memorial complex and museum of military exploits of heroes of the foreign military operation took place in Pyongyang, in which a Russian delegation headed by the chairman of the State Duma of the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation, Vyacheslav Volodin, took part, as well as a delegation of the Ministry of Defense of Russia headed by the Minister of Defense, Andrei Belousov. The President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, sent a greeting to the participants of this ceremony. In it, in particular, it was noted that during the liberation of the Kursk land, the Korean fighters, I quote, demonstrated exceptional courage and genuine selflessness, covered themselves with unfading glory, unquote. The memorial complex opened in Pyongyang is not only a tribute to the memory and deepest respect for the fallen heroes, but also a unique cultural and educational space having significance in the context of preserving historical memory, a symbol of the Russian-Korean military brotherhood that passed a serious test of strength during recent events. We are convinced that our alliance, built on the principles of mutual assistance and comradeship, what is cemented by jointly shed blood, goes in line with the fundamental interests of the peoples of Russia and the DPRK, speaking from common positions in the face of numerous challenges and threats for the construction of a more just multipolar world. A few words have already been said about the nuclear blackmail of the Kiev regime. Let us elaborate on this subject. On April 26, just the other day, Zelensky, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Andrei Sybiga, tried to use the 40th anniversary of the accident at the Chernobyl NPP for the hypocritical replication of groundless accusations against Russia. They did this in the style of a guilty mind betrays itself. Zelensky, for instance, at the so-called International Chernobyl Conference on Recovery and Nuclear Safety, with a straight face, imputed to Russia the desire to turn Chernobyl and the exclusion zone itself into a territory of war. This is a direct quote. And at the same time, the use for military purposes of the Zaporizhia NPP, which, as is known, is being subjected to strikes specifically by the UAF. He was echoed by the foreign minister, the so-called foreign minister, Andrei Sybiga, who distinguished himself on social networks with lengthy fabrications about Russia's allegedly globally threatening reckless actions. Of course, Russia was accused and turning nuclear risks into a weapon, unquote. But who is it that turns this whole situation, this whole nuclear agenda into a risk, into a weapon? It is Kiev regime. On the contrary, we have repeatedly exposed the brazen and cynical lies of Zelensky regime and presented to the international community facts of Kiev's attempts to carry out nuclear terrorism and dangerous provocations regarding the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant and other nuclear energy facilities on the territory of our country. On April 27 of this year, a driver died from a strike by Ukrainian UAV on the territory of the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant transport shop. We have already given an evaluation to this barbaric crime of Kiev regime, but for some reason they made no statement in this regard, and neither Zelensky nor Sabiga to make an additional commentary. We have repeatedly testified that terrorism has long been used by Bankova as an instrument of state policy. In an interview with the French publication Le Monde on March 26 this year, Zelensky stated that Ukraine should be given both NATO membership and nuclear weapons as security guarantees. In fact, he continues to provoke nuclear conflict by making such statements. Moreover, Western Europe risks becoming the first victim of nuclear blackmail. The Europeans need to understand if he does not stop, they will not be able to avoid the consequences. They should stop their puppet, because otherwise, in this hysteria, they won't be able to escape the consequences. Zelensky does not want peace. He strives for an endless prolongation of hostilities and is ready to go for a dangerous escalation of the conflict. For the sake of this, he has once again extended martial law, this time until August 2nd, and continues to carry out the forced mobilization or engravement, which it is in reality. You might think, what can be worse than what we see when we analyze the pictures, materials, see video chronicles of those recruitment centers in Ukraine, take by force Ukrainian citizens into those man-catching cars. They tie their hands and legs. They kill them. What can be worse? But there is a bottom that has not been reached. The problem of drug use has acquired a massive character in the UAF, in addition to widespread alcoholism and desertion. Kyiv is no longer in a position to hush up this well-known fact. Recently, the military ombudsman of Ukraine, the thing that I'm going to quote, it is not only the information we confirmed, this is the information that has finally found its way to public space in Ukraine. So, the other day, the military ombudswoman of Ukraine, Olga Reshetilova, publicly admitted that during interdepartmental inspections in the UFS, a significant number of soldiers unfit for service due to drug addiction were discovered. Many of them were healthy according to documents. That means that was not the reason for them not to undergo recruitment. Nothing of that kind. According to the documents, everything was all right. But at the same time, they continued to use drugs or suffered from withdrawals. Naturally, Ukrainian agencies do not publish any statistical data on this problem, but you can imagine this, and let us analyze and let us see why. Because reports from a number of non-governmental structures, and some of them, I will provide their names in the text of the briefing so that you can use this reference and analyze all the given data. All this allows us to form an idea of its scale. According to the release data, about 38% of the UAF personnel use amphetamines at least once a month, 20% pregabalin, 16% the so-called salts, and 13% tramadol. At the same time, more than 40% had experience using drugs prior to entering military service. About a quarter of those convicted of drug possession without the intent to distribute are Ukrainian military personnel. According to analysts, let me reiterate, in the text of the briefing, I will give you the names of the bodies which were engaged in preparing these reports, the main factor contributing to the spread of psychoactive substances in the UF is the presence of a constant demand for drugs on the part of military personnel aged 25 to 45. This means this is a sustainable demand. This is the system of distribution and use of drugs by UAF soldiers. In addition, the accessibility of drugs in frontline regions has an impact. Supply is provided by both local dealers and international criminal groups delivering precursors and ready-made drugs from European Union countries. It goes so far that synthetic drugs are packaged as vitamins and sent by mail to frontline cities. Sometimes unit commanders trade in these drugs, often preferring to ignore the drug addiction of their subordinates, but it is also the source of income for them. In the reports of foreign NGOs, cases are recorded when drug-addicted UAF militants, against the background of psychosis and paranoia, use physical violence and weapons against the civilian populations and mine buildings where civilians may be located. In August 2025, the Ukrainian government approved a new national drug policy strategy for the period up to 2030. One of the goals is the development and implementation of progressive methods for treating post-traumatic stress disorder and other psychiatric disorders using, what do you think what? Not vitamin C, not fitness, but narcotic substances. Consultants from Soros structures provided active assistance in this, which suggests the idea that at their instigation the West is turning Ukraine, among other things, into an experimental platform for increasing drug addiction among the population under the pretext of psychiatric or psychological care. And against the backdrop, the war of Kiev regime and its repressive secretariat, so-called secretariat, against its own history is in full swing. The Kiev neo-Nazi regime continues to barbarically destroy and desecrate memorial objects dedicated to the feat of the Soviet people in the fight against the fascist invaders. Special zeal was shown by the settlement authorities of the Rovno region. On their instructions in many populated areas, barrel-reliefs of the Order of the Patriotic War were dismantled, from monuments to partisans and Red Army soldiers, and the words Great Patriotic War of 1941-1945, and no one is forgotten, nothing is forgotten. They were also erased. This phrase and this wording provokes a specific, particular outrage, because this wording suggests of what they are doing indeed. In the settlement of Dmitrovka, the names of fellow countrymen who died in battles where the Hitler soldiers were transferred to a plague ground where the Trident, and a mention of the Second World War of 1939-1945 and the previous plague with the surnames of the heroes was removed. And you understand it quite well that these plaques are not given to museums, they all are demolished. Similar cases of vandalism along with the Rovno region were recorded in the Kiev region, Vinnytsia and Ternopil regions, in the Transcarpathian regions. In the village of Bovisha, Bandera soldiers demolished a monument to fellow village dwellers who died in battles with the Nazis. In Kharkov, Ukrainian Nazis got rid of a memorial plaque to Ivan Bakulin, who led the local underground movement during the years of the Great Patriotic War, and let me remind you that the members of which destroyed over 23,000 German fascist invaders and their accomplices blew up 21 trains with troops and equipment. It is the right thing. This is what Germany is sponsoring, to stamp out any mention of those who make the German Nazi troops flee from this land. Their own predecessors. This is what they sponsor. The aforementioned facts confirm the relevance of the tasks of the denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine and the elimination of threats emanating from its territory. All these goals will definitely be achieved, as has been already stated on numerous occasions by Russian authorities. Now, the word Canada will be of particular interest in this context. On April 15th, the consistent revelator of Canadian Nazism, David Pouillet, published an article which exposed some unfavorable facts for the reputation and for the image of Canada. It turned out that in the period from January 13 to February 5 of this year, at the commander courses for the personnel of the Armed Forces and National Guard of Ukraine at the prestigious Canadian Royal Military College, Saint-Jean, Quebec Province, another Ukrainian soldier underwent training, either a sergeant or a warrant officer. It is only known that he is not an officer. But something about his personality caused concern among a number of Canadian military personnel. They looked into it. They reported up to the chain saying, "We are dealing with another ultra-right cutthroat, an Azov militant, the movement which is banned." Let me emphasize this. Those were complaints made by Canadians themselves, those who have an eye for that. They spoke not only about their emotions, they cited facts, but their complaints were ignored. The army leadership, as it turned out, was already aware of the fighters' affiliation with the Nazi unit. How so? The Canadians condemn all forms of Nazis, do they not? Reacting to the situation, Canadian Member of Parliament David McGuinty stated that the mandate held by the armed forces allegedly never envisioned the training of Azov members. The official representative of the military department, Kenneth Sadikio, added that the Ukrainians, they say, were explicitly instructed not to send Azov militants to Canada for training. It is the case of absolute hypocrisy. They send money, they support them politically, financially, I mean the Azov movement. And in this case, they asked not to send Azov militants. But for some reason, Bankova sent some of them. In the current case, the militant's affiliation was revealed not immediately, but only a few days before the end of the courses. He had no time to pass the standards, but nevertheless, could one not issue a Canadian certificate of course completion to another Nazi cutthroat? And indeed, they issued it. And once again, they promised, just like in previous years, that Ukrainians would no longer send Azov members to Canada, and the Canadians would not train them. The average Canadian will at the same time be confident that his country is against Nazism, because that's what they said on TV. They adopted some laws, some documents, some declarations. In words, Canadian military commanders continue to declare a distancing from Nazism and the extreme right Ukrainian nationalists. However, as we see in reality, everything happens quite differently. They may start to applaud to a Nazi in the Canadian Parliament, and then they continue to verify how it turned out that for decades, not for some several years, but for decades, this killer, and he's a killer indeed, was hiding in the Canadian society, in the Canadian community. And now they are training Azov militants. They asked them not to come, but they did come, and they cannot refuse this opportunity for them. As a positive aspect out of this entire unpleasant situation, only the following can be highlighted. It turns out that in Canadian military schools there are still those who openly oppose Nazism and directly state their protest to their superiors, pointing out the inadmissibility of the presence, let alone the training of Nazi cutthroats there. It is also gratifying that in Canadian military circles and among the public that cares, there are those who are troubled by the shameful ties of their state with Ukrainian Nazism and historical Nazism, and they are not afraid to speak about this openly.
One more journalist investigation with a different tone. In Germany, there was a presentation of a book with a grandiose title, The Explosion of Nord Stream, True Story of a Sabotage That Shocked Europe, the end of quote. It was published in Europe by an American journalist investigator, by Jan Panchevsky. The author reproduces the very well-known version of the events of the 26th of September 2022, when in the exclusive economic zone of Sweden and Denmark, there was a terrorist attack committed between the main gas pipelines of Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. Well, which is this version? The version that was presented in the Western media sphere, according to which this crime was committed by the Kiev regime, and the intelligence services of the US and the European countries were informed by Ukraine about their intentions. Oh, it was not a report, they just knew about it. Well, I'm not going to speak about the accuracy of the facts in this book. The author insists that his investigation is based on conversations with those who participated in the events, with investigators, workers of the special services. The military gave the author an unprecedented access, so that allowed him to meet who planned and performed the biggest sabotage in history. Well, let us follow a logical way, and let's start from the beginning. It is said that the Kiev regime gave the author, this investigator, an unprecedented access which allowed him to meet those who planned and performed the biggest sabotage in history. But it's not sabotage, it's a terrorist attack. Well, speaking about those who planned it, I'll remind you, for the first time, publicly, not in some classified documents, not in marginalized pamphlets. No, it was said publicly that these pipelines will be destroyed and this project should not have existed, was said in the US. And the president of the US, the former president, Joe Biden, he was then president, and the Vice Secretary of State, Victoria Nuland. Now she's ex-Vice Secretary of State. This is what happened. So the question is, the White House and the Secretary of State, did they have a meeting with the author of this book to speak about the details of the plan that the President of the US, Joe Biden, was speaking at the time? He didn't only say that this project will not exist. He answered a question about how the US will achieve it. He said that they have all the opportunities for this. But something tells me that in truth, no one expected the words of this author in the White House or in the Secretary of State. And the intelligence services of the US, who could shed light on the explosion of the Nord Streams, in fact, didn't give him any information. So, in fact, is the FU truly interested in the objective information about this terrorist attack? This is a rhetorical question. Everyone knows the answer. They are not interested in it. But I would like to point out another thing. The fact of this journalist investigation. It is stated in the book review, and the author said it himself, that he spoke to the investigators, to those who participated in the process. All of this means that official investigation is not there at all, or its results are not reliable. So how to write books when investigators work? And one more thing, these investigators should have been working in many countries, because this is an international project. We're speaking not only about the territory, land, but also the waters of several countries. Russia insists on having an objective, comprehensive, independent investigation of the causes of these terrorist attacks and on bringing to justice of all the responsible. But right now we have to state that all the investigations conducted by Western countries obviously has not given any results 3 years after. We still have not received answers about possible participation of Anglo-Saxons and other NATO countries. We see that Western countries are not interested in finding out the truth. They refuse to interact with Russia, but Russia owns these pipelines. All the requests of legal aid, of joint expert assessment, as well as the initiatives of organizing international investigation are being ignored or rejected under far-fetched pretexts. Denmark and Sweden, whose national investigations resulted in nothing, in fact, trying to forget this terrorist attack. They categorically reject the idea of international investigation under the edges of the UN. This was the other initiative of our country in the UN Security Council, but they rejected it. Germany continues to prolong the process, avoiding the provision of substantive information to the UN Security Council or its own citizens. Well, I think they're going just to send a book to the UN Security Council members answering to the questions about the investigations. In this book by Boyan Panchevsky, we see attempts to throw the investigation off the trail. First of all, on the front, they put the version of about some Ukrainian lone swimmers. You know how it's done. You just take a tube, you take some kind of a package, some screwdrivers and other instruments, or something else what an ordinary swimmer can take with themselves. That is what any swimmer needs to undermine, to explode a pipeline. But this is how it is explained. This is ridiculous. Not only in this book, but also by those people in the West who are trying to tell about some kind of information that the investigation has. Of course, in the book, it is flavored with some kind of reservations about the information that was given to the enthusiasts from the Western intelligence services and to personally Zelensky. I would like to remind you that in February 2022, then American President, I will point this out every time, Joe Biden said that it was his intention to destroy Nord Streams. And there was a version of American journalist, the Pulitzer Prize winner Seymour Hersh, according to which these were U.S. divers in the summer of 2022 put explosive devices under the pipelines during the NATO exercises Belltops, and 3 months after they just exploded it. We are going to reach justice with all the possible ways of international law. We officially have presented pre-trial claims to Germany, Denmark, Sweden and Switzerland on the basis of International Convention for the Suppression of Terrorist Bombings of 1997, International Convention for the Suppression of the Financing of Terrorism of 1999. And if this issue is going to be solved on this stage, then the Russian Federation is going to transfer the case to the judicial arena and go to the International Court of Justice because of their violation by these countries of their conventional commitments. Our position is unchanged. We require honest, open and unbiased investigation and not a forgery in the form of publications of journalist versions supposedly having access to some classified materials. Investigation has access to classified materials, and if they work with them, all those who have to do with this, all of those who have to do with the case need to have access to these materials and to draw their conclusions. Well, someone explodes and someone builds. On the 28th of April in Bangladesh, with the participation of the Ministry of Science and Technology of the Republic and of the CEO of State Corporation Rosatom, Alexei Likhachov, the ceremony of nuclear fuel loading in the first unit of the NPP report was performed. The next stage is going to be the energy commissioning, when the produced electricity is going to into the energy network of Bangladesh, and this can happen in June this year. The first NPP of Bangladesh with 2 reactors with the full capacity of 2,400 megawatts is being built by Russian subcontracting organizations with the funding provided to the government of Bangladesh by the government of Russian Federation on the basis of 2 credit agreements of 2013-2016. It is expected that after the launching of the second energy unit and the gradual operationalization of both reactors, NPP is going to cover up to 10% of all the demands of Bangladesh in electricity. One more piece of news. You can see that sometimes, periodically, the Westerners condemn us of all the sins, as well in the information sphere, saying that Russia is sending away their journalists, not allowing them to work in our country. But I would like to remind you that the accreditation for our briefings online, for participate online, is accessible to all the journalists from all the countries without any segregation. You just need to send a request a day before the briefing, the day before the consideration is finalized, and if you have an accreditation as a journalist, we will be glad to communicate with you wherever you are. But this doesn't stop those who receive money for this black propaganda and accuses us of everything. When we communicate with the foreign journalists, and we prohibit when we do not give the accreditation, we usually do it as an answer to the same actions against our journalists. For instance, when Collective West sends out our journalists, we mirror these actions. But unlike Western states, this is not our desire. This is not our desire to mock someone or to oppress something. We give people an opportunity to gather their things. We help them if they have some logistic problems. And every time we underline that they can come to our country as a tourist, for instance, without any limitations. At the second case, is that sometimes we have to farewell to Western journalists if they violate the legislation of the Russian Federation. For instance, they are given a journalist visa, but they perform some activities that cannot be performed according to the visa given to them. Then we have to send them away. But we do not do this on any other basis. So let's see what's happening. The representatives of the collective Brussels that in any case speak about their commitment to the principles of free access to information, pluralism of the media, once again demonstrated something absolutely different. Last week it became known that the European Commission, using the references to illegitimate the EU sanctions against Mir Россия Сегодня, supported this decision of Interinstitutional Accreditation Committee to refuse accreditation before the EU organs to the chief correspondent of RIA Novosti, Yuri Aprelov. Despite the comments of the officials of the EU that these restrictive measures do not prevent the journalists from performing their professional activities on the territory of the Union. In practice, Russian correspondent was deprived of physical access to the buildings of European institutions and opportunity to participate in their press events. In this situation, Mr. Aprelov cannot perform his journalist duties fully. That is why he has to go back to Russia. But I would like to say once again, he was ready to continue working as journalist. He was working honestly according to the rules that were presented to him as an accreditation rules. I remind that the position of the European Commission was questioned even by the colleagues. European MP Fernand Kartaize doubted that it corresponds to the norms of the EU in the sphere of the freedom of press, and asked Ursula von der Leyen to interfere in the situation. But the head of the European Commission didn't even explain the reasons of not giving the accreditation to the correspondent, but instead gave a useful advice. What do you think was it? Just imagine a person who works as a journalist. He's denied an accreditation. And those who are following the problem of the freedom of speech give them an answer. They give him a recommendation to change his job. Well, this is wonderful. And after this mocking recommendation, Yuri Aprelev received a negative answer to the appeal given to the accreditation committee. This is another round of the EU campaign for direct, targeted marginalization of the Russian media, of their oppression, making it impossible for them to perform their professional activity. Demonstrative prolonging of answers exposes vicious practice of European institutions to edit out from their information space undesirable representatives of Russian media that are effectively and unbiasedly perform their work. Nevertheless, despite the sanctions and blockings, the popularity of Russian media resources show high interest among the population of the European Union. People are interested in truthful and non-biased journalism. Well, and the favorite part, the favorite for them, I think they truly enjoy all of this because they perform this once and once again. Because we are going to have an adequate answer to all the steps of the European Commission to oppress Russian media. One more topic related to the modern times and history. We were outraged by the desecration of our monument in the cemetery Gersthof in Vienna. Just think about it, in Vienna. The Vienna itself that would never exist in its current state. The favorite capital of Austrians. They would not exist if not for those Soviet soldiers that gave their lives for the freedom of Austria. The Vandals painted the monument to the 8 people who died liberating the capital of Austria. Who are these 8 people? We know the names of 7 of them. These are Russian, Ukrainian soldiers and 1 Belarus soldier. Who and why, after all these years, has to settle scores with them? This despicable act was performed in the run-up to the Victory Day in the Great Patriotic War. The embassy of Russia in Austria immediately informed the local authorities about this, sent a note to the Austrian Foreign Ministry asking to take exhaustive measures to establish the circumstances of what happened and to bring to justice those who are guilty. According to the Article 19 about the State Treaty on the Restoration of Independent and Democratic Austria of the 15th of May 1955, the tombs and monuments of glory of the armies of the countries victorious in the Great Patriotic War in the Second World War must be protected and preserved. Continuing with the history, on the 3rd of May, it is 80 years since the beginning of the work of the International Military Tribunal for the Far East in Tokyo. This process, that sometimes is called Asian Nuremberg, was absolutely important for the world from the point of view of the law and humanity, and its results are absolutely relevant today. The Tokyo process was very important for punishing the main ally of the fascist Germany in Asia, Japan, for crimes against civilians in this region, including the USSR. It enshrined the axiom that aggression, whatever are the mottos that are used to cover it, must be punished. The militarist Japan promoted itself, and I will remind you This is a quote from the documents, as a liberator of Asia from the Western colonial domination. But in fact, it was enslaving Asian states, making them their colonies, committing inhumane crimes against civilians. The so-called Tokyo process gave its harsh evaluation to all these unlawful acts.
The Class A criminals were sentenced to the supreme penalty, meaning the elites, the government elites of militarized Japan, which led the country to a national catastrophe. Official Tokyo should remember the lessons of history and abandon its currently pursued course of forced remilitarization, as well as attempts to consign to oblivion the atrocities of the military political leadership of Japan in the period of 1930s-1940s. Soviet diplomats and lawyers made a significant contribution to the preparation of the evidence base and the implementation of the necessary procedures, delivered important witnesses, and carried out their interrogation during the trial itself. This helped to form, among other things, the authentic picture of the atrocities of the Kwantung Army in Manchuria. However, not all Japanese criminals ended up in the dock of this tribunal. That is precisely why, in 1949, the USSR initiated a separate trial in Khabarovsk. The main theme became the accusation of a group of former military personnel of creating special units, detachments 731 and 100 engaged in the development of biological weapons during the Second World War. Specifically, they were charged with breeding bacteria of plague, cholera, anthrax, and other severe diseases, conducting experiments on human beings, primarily on Soviet prisoners of war, to infect them with the aforementioned diseases, as well as using bioweapons against the residents of China, in particular regular bombings of Chinese county towns with bombs stuffed with the combat bacteriological agents, and sabotage committed against the citizens of the Soviet Far East. We continue to apply efforts and further reveal the facts of the crimes of Japanese militarism, systematically making public during briefings and speeches the corresponding information received, in particular from the Prosecutor General's Office of the Russian Federation. The atrocities of militarized Japan have no statute of limitations, and procedural actions with the aim of punishing all those guilty will be continued. And now I am ready to answer your questions. International Life, are you with us? German's Chancellor Merz admitted that to end the conflict in Ukraine and join the UK will have to make territorial concessions. At some point, Ukraine will sign a ceasefire agreement. At some point, I hope, a peace treaty with Russia. Then it may turn out that part of the territory of Ukraine will no longer be Ukrainian. If President Zelensky wants to convey this to his population and secure the support of the majority, he needs to organize a referendum on this issue. He must simultaneously tell the people, I have opened the path to Europe for you. How would you comment on this? Let me remind you that neither the FRG nor the EU as a whole are participants in the negotiation process for resolving the conflict in Ukraine. Any statements made by their leaders on this matter are not significant to us, you would say. So that means that you would not respond to any constructive or peace-loving statements. Of course we will, if they will be substantiated, and if they will be substantiated by some concrete actions. While they continue to turn the blind eye to terrorist actions of Kiev regime, they continue to sponsor this bloody chaos created by Bankova. We will judge only by actions. My second question. Yesterday, we received the news of the liberation of Alexander Butagin, who was detained in Poland last December. How would you comment on this? Of course, we are happy that an outstanding scientist who was working in Hermitage, who was the head of the Department of the Ancient World, the Russian Foreign Ministry has actively participated in the joint efforts for his release since the moment of his detention in Poland. employees of our embassy in Warsaw were in the closest contact with him and the lawyers defending his interests. We are sincerely grateful to the representatives of the Russian international scientific community who spoke out in support of the Russian scientists. We received numerous appeals in this regard. I would like to reiterate this. So we do appreciate the efforts of the public communities who came from other parts of our planet and addressed appeals to support Alexander Butagin. The detention in Poland in December 2025 at the request of Ukraine of a prominent Russian scientist right during a lecture tour under an absolutely trumped-up pretext became an telling example of the cross-legal arbitrariness reigning in the countries of the collective West. They never managed to explain anything. In this regard, we once again call on Russian citizens to carefully study the recommendations of the Russian Foreign Ministry when planning their stay abroad. We will provide the corresponding link to the text of today's briefing. We consider it necessary to remind you of the advisability of assessing risks and avoiding regions with a potentially high level of tension. When choosing a travel destination, we advise you to be guided by the information published on the official resources of the Russian Foreign Ministry, the Russian Ministry of Economic Development, as well as the authorized bodies of the state planned to be visited. Sometimes they stated openly everything that will be done to Russian citizens and provide some concrete examples. So you have to study this thoroughly. That is why we strongly recommend for those who actively travel due to different circumstances, just make this content, make this rubric your guidebook. I mean, the materials posted in the Traveling Abroad section of the useful information heading on the official website of the Russian Foreign Ministry and the corresponding section of the Consular Information Portal, as well as corresponding sections on the websites of Russian foreign missions in the countries of the intended trip. Thank you very much. Thank you. Rian user with us. Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova, Christina Rodriguez. We have one question today. I would like to ask you to assess the outcomes of the UNESCO session that took place in Paris in April and has just finished. As you know, Russia took part in the 224th session of the Executive Board as an observer, since it is not currently a member of this body. At the same time, I believe we managed to achieve a number of important results for our country. We ensured the unhindered inclusion of the Russian geological site, Toretau, located in Bashkortostan, into the UNESCO Global Geoparks Network. This is already the second such site in our country. We count on strengthening its horizontal ties with geoparks in other countries and are ready to share our experience with partners, including the CS member states, which are considering the possibility of establishing similar sites in their territory. Together with the delegations of the Global South, we counteracted the attempts by the Ukrainians and their Western patrons to politicize the work of UNESCO. We did not allow the adoption by consensus of the confrontational draft decision aimed at discrediting our country on the emergency assistance program for Ukraine. During the meeting, we drew attention to the ongoing gross violations by the Kiev and Baltic regimes of the linguistic and educational rights of the Russian-speaking population of Ukraine and the Baltic countries. We explained to our partners the true underlying motive of the Ukrainian initiative, the 40th anniversary of the Chernobyl disaster, introduced for the first time in UNESCO, aimed at falsifying the common tragedy of the peoples of the USSR. Just in case, I will explain to everyone who had so much concerns about these initiatives, not the whole Ukraine, but the Kiev regime, Bankova, Zelensky, they receive billions of dollars and euros. During last briefing, we discussed the catastrophic state of this cover, which was built over in extraordinary settings, over what remained after the Chernobyl NPP, in order to protect the world from the radiation, and this protective cover is in a very dire condition. Perhaps they could, out of those billions, provide just some modest sum for their own safety and their own security. No. It is much easier for them just to take a paper, to start waving it, to start accusing Russia of everything, but to provide money, God forbid. They cannot sponsor any concrete projects. Why can't they do that? Because they are going to loot everything, they're going to steal everyone. And I analyzed all the publications, and it turned out that we did not know it all. And this very project that Ukraine tried to adopt, it was not supported by the majority, and Russia became a co-author of the draft decision proposed by Kazakhstani partners, strengthening the contribution of UNESCO associations and clubs to the implementation of the organization's programs and global priorities, as well as the Uzbekistani draft International Day for Documentary Heritage. We shared the Russian experience in introducing inclusive education, which received high praise from partners who are ready to send their representatives to participate in the international pool of experts being formed in our country under the coordinated role of leading Russian universities. We took an active part in the dialogue on reforming the organization UNESCO 80, proposed by the UNESCO Director General, the Egyptian called El Anani. In close interaction with partner delegations, we emphasized the need to strengthen the role of member states in decision-making. The session showed that despite the ongoing attempts by Westerners and their Ukrainian protégés to cause a split in the work of UNESCO, the organization remains an effective platform for the interaction of countries in the humanitarian sphere, where Russia succeeds in promoting its approaches. If it is it, Izvestia, are you with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We are going to have 3 questions. In Ukraine, they approved the extension of martial law until August 2, 2026, and further mobilization. Will the extension of mobilization affect the prospects of the negotiation process? Can this decision be considered a sign of Kyiv's lack of readiness for de-escalation? Is the chosen date of August 2nd, in the opinion of the Foreign Ministry, an indicator of plans coordinated with the West to wage a long campaign? I already commented on the subject of extending martial law on Ukraine in the opening part of the briefing. There is nothing new in this information. Of the past few years, Zelensky has been regularly extending both martial law and forced mobilization, which has turned into a more inhumane method. It turned out into a meat grinder for Ukrainian citizens. The regime of Bankova does not want peace and strives for the endless prolongation of hostilities. So we have mentioned this on numerous occasions. Thank you very much. Sputnik, are you with us? Good afternoon, Sputnik, Belarus, Andrei Sablavsky. France and Poland have announced the holding of large-scale exercises during which, among other things, mock nuclear strikes against the territory of Russia and its strategic partner Belarus will be practiced. How will you comment on such a decision? We have already touched upon this issue during the briefing on April 24 of this year. Our position has not changed. All the necessary assessments regarding the French initiatives and actions for its implementation have already been repeatedly and thoroughly voiced by us. I can reiterate that the corresponding, frankly provocative activity of the EU and NATO countries in the military nuclear sphere is being monitored by us in the most careful manner, including the increasing involvement in it of nominally non-nuclear countries from the Western camp in the context of the 11th Review Conference of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, which started the day before in New York. I cannot help but note once again that such steps cause irreparable damage to the global nuclear non-proliferation regime and hinder the achievement of its goals. We will make all necessary efforts to ensure that such provocative plans and actions receive a proper assessment during the review conference. And we call that you follow closely the work of our representatives in the context of this event in New York. Thank you very much. Thank you. Xinhua Agency, are you with us? Good afternoon. May 3 marks 80 years since the start of the Tokyo trial, the trial of Japanese war criminals. At that time, many of those responsible for Japan's aggressive war escaped trial, and crimes committed by Japan, such as the development and use of biological and chemical weapons, remained unpunished. How would you comment on the historical significance of the Tokyo trial? And what lessons should be drawn from it? Thank you. I have already dwelled in sufficient detail on the results and significance of the Tokyo trial in the opening part of the briefing. And also, they escaped trial then in Tokyo, and then we reached them in Khabarovsk and added to those who escaped that in Tokyo. During the previous meetings, we dwelled on this in significant detail. Lieutenant General Esena, for many years, he was the notorious Detachment 731, and he was personally the head of preparation and experiments on human beings back then. He escaped into the zone of American occupation back then when the United States were organizing their own experiments and their own activities. So we also touched upon this in detail. It is not surprising that when, on January the 7th, the Soviet prosecutors for the Far East, Alexander Vasilyev, sent to the legal department of the staff of the Allied Occupation Forces, Army General of the U.S., Douglas MacArthur, a letter, the Soviet side was asking to extradite Seru as a criminal of war who perpetrated a crime against the USSR, and as you can understand, there was no response to the request. Nevertheless, some reaction from Washington came. Experts in chemical and biological weapons were sent from the base Camp Detrick to Japan. They also were interrogated. They also interrogated General Seru and 19 Japanese medical experts who found themselves in the United States. And the materials on the bacteriological war are not declassified. The American commanders in the Far East came to the conclusion all of the personnel in the service to the units 731 and 100, what do they need? According to the logic, they had to be sentenced. No, from the point of view of the United States, they had to be provided the immunity from prosecution in exchange for the information of Japanese military biological programs. Thus, the United States got hold of unique knowledge received during not laboratory experiments on animals, but experiments on people, on human beings, which were carried out by those Japanese military criminals. And they managed to evade their just punishment. What conclusions can be made out of this? I believe that they are obvious. First and foremost, one has to know his or her own history. And those crimes committed during the Second World War have no statute of limitations, and the work to clarify them will be carried out. CROC and his accomplices still persist in the whole world. They continue to develop their military biological programs despite all the risks for the well-being and for the existence of people. And I believe that the main conclusion that we should make, the final conclusion, see Article 1.1, if you do not know the history, you have to learn the lessons of the history once again from the very beginning.
Media Corporation of China, are you with us? Hello, I have one question. On the 27th of April in New York, in the UN, the 11th NPT review conference started. The Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, at the opening of the conference said that we already hear once again the nuclear sables and the world is amnesic. So there was a proposal that this NPT review conference must urge the US to perform their first and foremost responsibility in the nuclear non-proliferation. And there is a need to stop the creation of nuclear alliances, such mechanisms as the common use or joint use of nuclear facilities, and to stop some of the countries from having their own nuclear weapons. So, what can you say about the words of the UN Secretary General about the amnesia in the world considering the nuclear weapons? And does Russia agree with these words? Well, what can I say about your question? First of all, I would like to focus your attention on the fact that Russian and Chinese diplomats and experts work closely on the whole spectrum of issues concerning the problems of the NPT and the agenda of the NPT review conference that started, as it was already said today, in New York on the 27th of April. We always compare notes, coordinate, have consultations, share our views. This will continue to be done by the delegations of Russia and China during the conference itself. Our common goal is to search together for the optimal ways to contribute to this event that is very important for the international community. But not for the success of this event in itself, but for the results of this international structure to be implemented, so that these goals are implemented as they're institutionalized. According to the experience of interaction between Russia and China in this sphere, the issues that are going to be discussed in New York, we have very similar approaches. Our national positions are almost similar, given the negative influence of international security and strategic stability, of the doctrinal concepts that are really destabilizing. And these are concepts that are followed by the Western countries. The provocative steps that you have named in your questions are one of the examples. I'm not going to give evaluation to the words of the Secretary General. You should ask him this question. But the level of nuclear risks has increased in the recent years. This is understandable. This is an objective, obvious fact. And we see that the risks are escalating because of the acts of the Western countries that I have already mentioned. This opinion is shared by our Chinese colleagues. Without any serious dialogue, conversation, not just periodic emotional outbreaks, we cannot keep working. Well, I don't think that the Secretary General should just comment on this. It is necessary to create for the Secretariat and for the countries the conditions that are necessary to work in this sphere based on the mandate that they have. After a detailed analysis from our side, from the Russian side, you will hear our evaluation from the delegation at the review conference. We will also issue a statement after the end of the conference. Please follow this platform and the comments of the Russian delegation regarding the conference itself. And we will continue to support this in our accounts in social networks. Thank you. Rita, are you here? Good afternoon, Ms. Zakharova. Good afternoon. We have one question. Please, could you comment on the situation in Mali? What is the assessment of Russia regarding the stabilization in this country? What are the actions that Russia is going to take, ready to take, to stabilize the situation in the country? Well, I can say that all the information in this regard was given in our comment on the 25th of April, and yesterday the Minister of Defense issued a comment on that. So there is nothing to add. If there are some developments, we will inform you. Thank you. DawnNews, are you here? Good afternoon, Ms. Zakharova. Information agency DawnNews. Soon we are going to celebrate the 81st anniversary of victory in the Great Patriotic War. In Georgia, the 9th of May is a public holiday that is celebrated at the highest level. Traditionally, this day we honor veterans, those who served in the front, and home front workers. We warmly remember the fallen heroes of war. Can we consider that the fight against fascism during the Great Patriotic War is one of the most glorious episodes of our common history that unites the people of our countries? Thank you very much. First of all, I can briefly say yes, answering to your question, but actually I would like to dwell on this topic. First of all, thank you very much for saying that this is a joint holiday. You're not saying that it's someone else's holiday, but you say we and ours. This is a public holiday. We also have it as a public holiday. We are not dividing it between our countries. I'm going to give you some numbers that are in fact even brighter and deeper and more important than any words. The population of Georgia is 3.5 million people. It was at the time the population of the Georgian Soviet Republic, 3.5 million people. Georgia sent 700,000 soldiers. The population is just 3.5 million, including kids, women, elderly, ill people, or those who were not unfit for, not for just military service, but were not seen as someone who could serve. But out of all of them, 700,000 people went to the front. Just two numbers that speak for themselves about the contribution of Georgia. Half of them, and this is the third number, I think that this number makes this topic immortal, more than a half of them. I'm not going to say more or less, just half of them didn't go back, didn't come back to their homes from the war. Just imagine what we're talking about. Georgia carried through the years the memory of those soldiers and officers that protected our common motherland, defended true freedom, right for a peaceful life. The anniversary medal was issued for the 80 years in the victory in the Great Patriotic War. It was presented to all the veterans, all those who could receive it, of all the veterans that are left. It was presented to them last year. So the obverse of this medal has an image of Russian and Georgian soldiers, Red Army soldiers Mikhail Yegorov and Militon Kantaria. Actually, I would like to say that I don't know about Georgia, but in our country, when we speak about Yegorov, speaking about the Great Patriotic War, we always remember Kantaria, because everyone understands what we're speaking about. We're speaking about the fact that they put the sacred banner of victory on Reichstag. In Russia, we preserve our common historical heritage with Georgia. We protect our memorial objects on our territory. Since the 17th to the 20th of April this year, a large-scale delegation from Georgia, headed by the head of the Immortal Army of Georgia movement, which is an analog of our Immortal Regiment, visited Chechen Republic in the context of the project Final Frontier and Patriotic Campaign I Returned, Mother. It was the delegation was formed by the president of the Soviet of Veterans of Georgia, Alexander Mikaberidze, and descendants of the war participants. They visited the tombs, honored the memory of soldiers, the Georgians who fought in the Battle of Caucasus. In the nearest time, we're going to perpetuate the memory of 300 Georgian soldiers and officers of 414th Red Banner Rifle Division of Anapa. At the time, it was called of Georgia. All of them died in hard, bloody battles against the enemy in February 1943, near the village of Kalabatka in Krasnodar region. Initially, they were buried in a common grave as unknown, but afterwards, their names were identified. The names of these Georgian Red Army soldiers that put their lives on the altar of victory. On the 9th of May this year, during the celebrations of the Day of Victory in the district of Chernoyerkovskaya in the Krasnodar region, there is a plan to perform a solemn ceremony of opening memorial plaques with their names. It was possible to find out their names thanks to the efforts of students, volunteers of a search project of Moscow Aviation Institute. It is called Soldier Obelisks, under the leadership of Alexander Gribovsky. From our side, we provided assistance to convey this information to the Georgian diaspora in Russia, so that they could also honor the memory of Georgian soldiers and officers. Once again, we do not divide the memory, we just share information. This ceremony will be an important event, and we hope that it will be duly covered in Georgia. People will know about this. I hope that our countries will continue to preserve legacy of the great victory. This is absolutely important when we see that there are attempts to rewrite, to cancel this history and to distort it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. TV Plus, are you here? Hello, Ms. Zakharova. Hello. Tbilisi, Georgia is here. I represent TV channel TV Plus. I'm a hero of the Soviet Union. Some of my relatives are now fighting in Russia.